Hello. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how social changes the world, right? So the question ultimately becomes, how does a social movement get its momentum? How does it actually start? How does it actually begin? And so at first, we can move to the next slide, please. So it starts off simply with one thought, one idea, and one tweet. But that's all something that's just very, very individual, right? It's something that we all feel. It's something that we believe in. We gain information about it. We read up on it. We may tweet it. We may share it out. And that is the start of a movement, right? But how do you grow that into something that actually affects lives and changes lives and pushes the boundaries for the belief systems that you actually have? And so a movement actually needs 3 ingredients. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those ingredients. The first is a platform, then the right tools, and then, of course, the passion for the community. So the first one, a platform. Next, please. So the first one, a platform, has to be there to amplify voices. Everybody has to have a voice online. A movement has to have a place, a location, actually, where that voice exists. And at Mashable, we say that we're the voice of digital culture. We are actually that platform. We believe that we're a movement, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how Mashable is a movement and the fact that we tell stories about digital innovation and the social web, which is effectively the digital revolution. And so one component of that about the digital revolution is the question of social good. So some of the stories we tell, part of the stories that we tell, actually are about how people are making a change for the positive as it relates to social. So through that, and through the next slide, please, we actually tell those stories to millions of people on a daily basis. And the fact that we tell them through the website, through the number of uniques, but more importantly, also through the social networks that we have, 15 million. And so next, please. So to be able to have that platform, to be able to have a point of view about that voice is really just the first step. You have to have a location. You have to be able to tell these stories. You have to have a presence there, right? But you actually need to then say something, right? You actually have to be able to know what you're going to say. You're online. You're at that presence. What's the types of stories that you want to tell? And that can be a very, very challenging, difficult process. Why? Because there's millions of things that are happening online every day. And so some of the tools that you use are actually about being able to predict what out of all the things that are happening, you're able to predict what does your audience want to hear. And you know, it's really interesting, right? The financial constructs the financial environment that we live in, certainly at the NASDAQ, has the ability to predict, right? We all believe that how do we actually get a return on our investment? The whole construct of that is based upon the fact that, hey, how am I going to get better? Are these stocks going to go up? Are these stocks going to go down? There's predictive models, huge predictive models that go into that. And at Mashable, the types of stories that we actually tell we do exactly the same thing. And we call that velocity. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about velocity. So velocity is a predictive engine that helps us determine pre-viral content. And what is pre-viral content? Pre-viral content states the fact that at some point in time, somebody posts a favorite meme, a photo, an image, an idea that eventually through the day says, wow, that's going viral, right? So how do you actually know if that's going to go viral? Well, you have to make a prediction, right? Mashable only writes 50 stories a day, and there are millions of things that are happening online. How do we find what those stories are to tell? And so through these proprietary algorithms that scour the social web, that listen to the social web, we're able to pull that up onto a dashboard and have our editorial teams look at that and say, OK, that story actually has the tendency to go viral. It has the tendency to be shared X number of times. And that's really important, because when you have a social movement, you only have so much time, so much space on the platform, right? You only have the ability to tell your stories or a series of stories a couple of times. And if you want to advance a social good cause, you have to be very, very particular about what you say. And so having that platform, having the right tools, the third component of that, if you get that right, you actually then have the passion of the community that you've built. And that becomes the call to action that happens. So that community, you have to find that passion. And at Mashable, we think a lot about what does that mean? What's the passion of our community? Well, it's the fact that our passion of our community actually shares the stories out. They engage in them. They comment on them. They're able to push those out. And so, yes, that's really important for when we tell about a really great meme or a Spider-Man parody or what is happening in the geopolitical environment. But for a social good, there's also stories that happen on social good. And at Mashable, one of our points of view is that we're very positive, we're aspirational, and we believe very strongly that there was a lot of stories to be told about social good. And it's important to our founder, Pete, and it's important to how we tell the stories that we do. So I'm going to go and just go over 4 quick stories that gives you an example to show how velocity works, to how these algorithms actually worked well. So over the holidays this past year, a Canadian airline, WestJet, posted an online video that talked about a digital Santa and how this digital Santa actually provided for some folks in need. And I think everybody can agree that as a social good, folks in need is something that we would all collaborate in, right? And especially around the holidays, I'm sure there were hundreds of thousands of stories to be told, big and small, brands, corporations. But the question is, okay, if you want to be able to tell one of the best stories for what it means around the holidays, for what it means to provide for the needy, how do you tell that story? How do you pluck that one story out of the social web and then actually tell it? So velocity is how we did that, right? We saw the path. We saw the way in which this particular YouTube video got shared through a host of other websites, through social networks, through comments, through links. And our algorithms predicted how that story was going to arc, how it was going to go viral. And we immediately wrote a story on it. And so that story came up, and that was important to us. It was a very feel-good story. And the fact that you can see up there, it got shared 1.6 million times. And that's a really interesting number, right? 1.6 million times for a story that is about this long and a video. Now, for us, it became about pulling that gravity about that feel-good environment, recognizing that this story was going to be the one that would go viral, and then sharing that out. So for the next one. So then we get down to a little smaller. Here we had Dove do an example about how women view themselves and how Dove's products are a way in which to enhance the way in which women should feel good about themselves. And so again, velocity worked in the way that said, based upon who was talking about this, based upon how it was being shared, you can see here that we wrote the story about it and was shared 700,000 times. Next, please. So you started very big feel-good, particular brands. And in this instance here, for Save the Children, it was a very particular engagement. There was a very particular desire to say, we want to bring awareness to what is happening to the children in the Syrian conflict. So Save the Children did a very emotive story that spoke about what it would look like for an average American girl to what her life would look like if suddenly her environment in a suburban home got turned into a war-torn conflict area. It's very powerful. I recommend that you take a look. And in that instance, we decided to tell this story because A, we believed in it. We thought it was an emotive story, one in which that the internet felt like it should engage in it. And here it got shared 16,000 times. Now finally, the story of Facebook and turning red for marriage equality. So in the instances that I spoke about before, these were specific examples of specific organizations. And if I want to talk a little bit about how social is changing the world, you had an entire social network, because of its users, believing in marriage equality. So certainly not everybody on Facebook, but we all saw instances of what our friends, when they changed their profile pictures to a red equal sign, and you said, okay, do I believe in marriage equality? Do I want to support this? I'm going to change my profile pic, and I'm going to share this out. So on the days in which the Supreme Court were arguing the debate, some of you, I'm sure, have remembered seeing this, everybody's profiles, a big chunk of folks' profiles pics got changed for marriage equality. And that has a real, tangible effect on how a social movement happens. And so that notion of social, being able to change the world, is really, really powerful. Next, please. So at Mashable, we say it's not only the stories that we write. It's not only that we acknowledge these stories about what is social good. We actively participate and we create. Very similar to talks like this today and TED throughout, we do what's called the Social Good Summit. Next, please. So the Social Good Summit is the world's largest global conversation on social good. It's an event that happens at the opening of the General Assembly of the UN. We've partnered with the UN Foundation, several other partners, Bill and Melinda Gates. And we have dialogues over the course of a day and a half, 2 days, about very short conversations like this today, 10-minute slots, about how digital media, how digital innovation, and how the social web actively changes the environment for good, whether it's women's rights in the Middle East, whether it's AIDS awareness in Africa, whether it's about how a soccer ball that gets kicked around produces a battery that fuels the house for the night. And all of these ways about digital innovation, and the theme of that hashtag is 2030 Now. So what do we need to do today to advance those causes going forward? Next, please. And the funny thing is, I think as you know, if you know some things about Mashable on the fact of the number of users that we have, 67% of our users are millennials and those who think like them. That's a very huge audience of 34 million monthly folks. And so the question ultimately becomes, is there an engagement? Everybody always likes to say that the youth feels disengaged by it and that they're self-entitled. But the fact of the matter is millennials, that our audience, does want to be engaged. Why? Because they share the stories that we write about. We're very particular. We use velocity. We use those algorithms to fix the specific stories that we want to be able to discuss. And through those stories, we're able to actually make a change, and then they engage in that. And millennials themselves are prepared to engage with socially responsible organizations or social causes in general. So I would invite you to join the movement that is Mashable. I'd invite you to create your own movement and to engage in social and in digital innovation and become the voice of digital culture. Thank you.